I'm Jenny, and I'm here today to talk to you about my upcoming novel Lindworm, and specifically about the folktale that inspired it, Prince Lindworm. So when I was in college, I spent a long time tracking down the origins of this story, because I first read it in this book, which I think is probably where most people who've heard this story heard it, because this is a book of Norwegian fairy tales, and I usually see Prince Lindworm listed as a Norwegian fairy tale. Now, East of the Sun, West of the Moon is a Norwegian fairy tale, and so were all the other stories in this book. They were collected by Asbjørnsen and Moe. But I'm a little obsessed with fairy tales, and this book isn't mine. I borrowed it from a relative. So of course I had to get my own copy of Asbjørnsen and Moe's works as well. And Prince Lindworm, my favorite story, wasn't in this book. Or in this book. Or in this one, which, fun fact, is actually in Norwegian. I got it in Norway. Prince Lindworm wasn't in any collection of Norwegian fairy tales I could find, and I checked out about a dozen from the library. Prince Lindworm isn't a Norwegian fairy tale. This book's preface explains that it contains Asbjørnsen and Moe stories previously published in another book, and also 2 other stories. But the way it's worded is confusing. It makes it sound like all of the stories are from Asbjørnsen and Moe. They just didn't all appear in this previous book, which is not the case. At least one of those other 2 stories wasn't from Asbjørnsen and Moe. Anyway, I read all of these other books by them, and it was becoming increasingly clear that Prince Lindworm had nothing to do with them. So, because I'm sort of an obsessive person, I had to find out where it came from. I went through the entire library catalog searching for anything to do with Lindworms, and it was a pretty small collection of books, even with the interlibrary loan system. I did get this book, Andrew Lang's Pink Fairy book, which has a version of King Lindworm that he says is from Sweden, which it's nice of Lang to cite a source, but I couldn't find any evidence anywhere that this story had any more to do with Sweden than it did with Norway. This book does include Prince Lindworm, but that's because it's the same as this book. Illustrations, preface and all, just with a different cover. So I kept looking, and eventually I found this, which I'm not going to keep holding up because it's an ebook on my iPad, and my iPad also has the script that I'm trying to read for this video. It's a PDF copy of a book which, as far as I can tell, was printed in 1854. Svend Grundtvig's Gamle dansk mynder I folkemunde. Sorry if I'm butchering that. I know a little Danish, but really only to read, not to speak. And honestly, I mostly learned the Danish I did know so that I could read that book, or part of it. The Kong Lindorm part. So that's certainly a more reliable source than this, or this. It predates the Pink Fairy book by about 40 years, and it's in the language of the country it actually claims to be from. Gamle dansk mynder I folkemunde was put together by Svend Grundtvig, who was a historian and anthropologist. He collected and documented Danish folk songs and ballads, including, apparently, Kong Lindorm, although if there's any music associated, I haven't found that. I'm fairly confident that that is a reliable primary source for the story, not just because of Grundtvig, but because he tells us exactly where he got the story from. Not something vague like Lang's Sweden, an actual person. Her name was Maren Mathesdottir. She was 67 years old, and she told the story to Grundtvig's adjunct, A. Levinson, in 1854. It is, in fact, the most accurately cited folktale I've ever seen. There's a whole lot of they roamed the countryside collecting stories in folklore, and there's often not much in the way of evidence for that. But here we know the specific random person who told this story to the folklorist who wrote it down, which I think is really cool. So that's the story of how I tracked down the origins of this story. Let's all thank Maren Mathesdottir for sharing this weird, wonderful fairy tale with the world, and for making my upcoming novel possible. Thanks for watching.